I remember walking into Robert Reich's Wealth and Poverty class as a wide-eyed undergrad at Berkeley over 10 years ago. This was one of the most popular courses on campus, and there was mystique and gravity that Professor Reich had that came from part celebrity status and part sage-like wisdom. His reputation well preceded him, not only as a previous Secretary of Labor under Bill Clinton, but also as a passionate and esteemed educator who so convincingly articulated the fiscal woes of a generation of young people like me. Taking this class was almost like a rite of passage, and every semester there'd be this long wait list to enroll. Unlike most lectures where attendance would quickly fizzle out week after week, this class was packed every time, not only by enrolled students, but by auditors, community members, and curious students just stopping by to snag a seat. The thesis of this class, Wealth and Poverty, was that increasing levels of wealth and income inequality in the United States was one of the primary issues threatening economic stability, social mobility, and ultimately democracy. And he advocated for progressive taxation, stronger labor rights, higher wages, and investments in education and infrastructure to make sure that wealth was more fairly distributed.
People think the actual distribution is A. But no, I'm going to show you what the actual distribution of wealth is, the real distribution.
To a lot of students like myself at the time, his message was like a siren song that spoke to our plight. It gave a sympathetic answer to questions like, why is everything so expensive? Why are we taking on so much debt to get a college education? Why does it feel like I'm never going to be able to afford a home? And what do we have to do to fix this? His message made us feel like it wasn't our fault, but rather the fault of our institutions and those rich people at its helm. And who better to symbolize these people than billionaires? And it's the nature of the debate over billionaires that's the catalyst for me making this video. About a month ago, a tweet by Professor Reich went viral on X. And in it, he said that there are basically 5 ways to accumulate $1 billion. 1, profiting from a monopoly. 2, insider trading. 3, political payoffs. 4, fraud. And 5, inheritance. Don't believe the self-made myth. Expectedly, the response from tech folks was pretty intense. You had Michael Dell, founder of Dell, saying, "Is this what you teach your students? Please do a little research, professor." Brad Gerstner, founder of Altimeter Capital, reacted with, "Such a terrible, bitter, and sad take on America. This country is full of heroic journeys of social mobility, folks like me who started with nothing but always believed we had a shot." Joe Lonsdale, co-founder of Palantir, said, "This is such a useful lesson to see how flawed the left's model of the world is at a core level." And Jason Calacanis, venture capitalist and journalist, said, "Do not let your kids go to any school this clown is associated with. They're literally brainwashing young folks to hate capitalism, success, and hard work." As well as a chorus of other pretty insulting things from a ton of people that I won't repeat here. It's no surprise at all that this is the reaction from tech folks, especially for founders and VCs who are obviously overwhelmingly very capitalist and who benefit so much from the system. But the visceral reaction is from them seeing firsthand so many people come to the Bay Area with nothing but ideas, engineering chops, and turn them into billion-dollar companies through hard work. And let me acknowledge that yes, the tech world is its own bubble. Of course this group is going to disagree with Robert Reich. But I think Silicon Valley's reaction is quite telling of a broader societal sentiment on topics like these. This past election, we saw a large chunk of the tech world take a big shift towards the right, so we should understand why this is the case. And I happen to think that this tweet is one such case study. The topic of billionaires can be a litmus test for what someone's stance is on technology. Silicon Valley has minted a lot of billionaires, and depending on who you ask to explain this phenomenon, you're going to get very different interpretations. Take Uber, for example. You could say that this is a company that has fundamentally transformed the face of transportation and logistics for the better, that they've empowered the masses to make a living on demand or to get a ride on demand with cutting-edge efficiency. And this value created is worth billions of dollars and the world is better off for it. On the other hand, someone might also say that Uber exploits workers, that surge pricing is unethical, that Uber causes traffic congestion and displaces taxi drivers, that CEO Travis Kalanick bred a workplace culture of bullying and harassment, that Uber often broke laws and exploited local regulations when they were expanding. So how do you bridge this conversation if you have people coming from these two sides? And by the way, the last example with Uber's regulatory issues is also an interesting one itself. You'll hear people in tech use it as a positive case study. Back in the day when Uber was expanding rapidly and getting pushback from various local governments, they would use a bunch of gray area strategies like launching without approval on purpose, using their app to rally riders and drivers to lobby their lawmakers, and positioning their company as a technology platform rather than a transportation service to avoid taxi laws. I can appreciate this type of headstrong problem solving. I would go even further to say that without this type of mentality, you can't transform this industry as rapidly or successfully, and that it's a net good for society. But that's the classic tech mantra that I'm speaking of: move fast and break things. And I can totally see someone making a reasonable point that Uber did technically act illegally in some cases, and maybe therefore unethically. But going back to Robert Reich, I respect the heck out of him. I think he's a great educator. From my lens though, I went from his class where I was indoctrinated with his philosophy into the tech world where I was indoctrinated with another philosophy. And I don't mean to use the word indoctrinate to emphasize anything negative, but to say that in each space, I'm drinking the Kool-Aid in hopes of understanding it in a sincere way. And between these two worldviews, I just see so many counterexamples in tech to what Reich is saying. Take Jensen Huang, for example. Grew up cleaning toilets at Denny's, studied hard, worked hard, founded NVIDIA in 1993, toiled for 30 years to build it into the behemoth it is today, while deeply advancing the world of compute and AI. Or Brian Chesky founded Airbnb, had his idea ridiculed by investors in the early days, rented out air mattresses in his own apartment at first, maxed out credit cards to stay afloat, flew out to host homes himself to take photos of their listings, ultimately transforming the hospitality and travel industry and building a valuable business that I'd bet over 80% of people watching this video have used. Are these people not self-made? Are they insider trading, making political payoffs, profiting from monopolies, or defrauding others? I would think that most people wouldn't say so. Or at least that the overwhelming reason for their success was not any of these factors, but the fact that they built great products with great value to society and were therefore rewarded by the market. But here's the problem. If you look for any modicum of these issues Reich listed, you'll always find them to certain degrees. And it then becomes a debate of semantics, edge cases, and absolutes. This is the essence of a prevailing narrative I hear pretty often, which is that there's no such thing as ethical billionaires. It's a debate that I've had with a lot of friends myself. Because depending on what your premise is, how you define what is ethical, and how you scope an individual's responsibility, you can make either argument make sense. Look, are there people who have been harmed by Airbnb? Maybe a tenant who is discriminated against by a host whose damaged property wouldn't get reimbursed by Airbnb, a town whose housing inventory and prices were impacted? Absolutely. Is Brian Chesky directly culpable for all these cases? Well, he created the system in which this happened, and the buck stops with him, right? So I guess? Or no, because at scale, bad things inevitably happen, regardless of how many precautions are taken, and we should expect companies to act in good faith to solve these issues. Every big tech company finds themselves in this conundrum. They're innovative, they've outcompeted many incumbents, and they offer a valuable service for which the consumer chooses to pay them. And at the same time, if you look for things they've done wrong, you will find them. For example, something somewhere in the supply chain is going to be suspicious. Someone's going to be aggrieved and sue them. Some employee is going to be mistreated, and it's going to come to light. The point I'm making is that I can see where people are coming from. And to be clear, I'm not even trying to defend billionaires. They probably should pay more taxes. I'm sure a lot of them outside the tech world made their wealth in highly unethical ways. But I guess my point is that in this bubble of tech, a blanket statement like the one Robert Reich made just comes off as a very bad faith argument to this audience. To some other audiences, I'm sure it's a banger tweet. But to this audience, it doesn't do anything to change minds or educate people on the other very serious issues leading to wealth inequality. What these types of discussions lack is nuance. Take the monopoly category, for example. Is NVIDIA a monopoly? They certainly have dominant market share in chips, but do they get there through anti-competitive behavior or just superior product innovation? And does that market position automatically invalidate Jensen's work? When Airbnb began, no one expected it to have such an impact on certain local housing markets. So does that make Brian Chesky unethical, or simply a founder navigating the complex consequences of his innovation? And how do we have more productive conversations? For me personally, I wish that as an undergrad, someone gave me the other side's perspective. I think Paul Graham articulates it really well in one of his essays as the pie fallacy. And it's that there is not a finite amount of money in the world. We don't need to always be in a mindset of scarcity, thinking that if someone gets more, then we get less. If there's one thing I appreciate about the tech industry, it's a belief in proof that we can create more for everyone. To quote an analogy Paul Graham gives in his essay, suppose you own a beat-up old car. Instead of sitting on your butt next summer, you could spend the time restoring your car to pristine condition. In doing so, you create wealth. The world is one pristine old car richer. And not just in some metaphorical way. If you sell your car, you'll get more for it. In restoring your old car, you have made yourself richer. You haven't made anyone else poorer. So there's obviously not a fixed pie. And in fact, when you look at it this way, you wonder why anyone would think there was. To me, that analogy represents a worldview of abundance, innovation, and yes, in some part, making money. At the same time, I think Reich's work to fight for the working class, to fight against this system, is noble and well-intentioned, and hopefully there can be space for both approaches. And lastly, in doing some research for this video, I found out that Professor Reich is now retired and actually taught wealth and poverty for the last time in 2023. Fortunately, he recorded all his lectures from that last semester, and they're available for free on his YouTube channel. I'd encourage anyone curious to watch them, and I'll include a link to them. And maybe it's fitting that we close this video out with his final farewell during his last class.
So a final benediction. May your days be filled with wonder. May your lives be filled with meaning. May your work be filled with joy. And may you live long and powerful lives. Thank you.